Hello and welcome back to the 6-inch Summer Squares series. This week I would like to do some Sashiko. It's been a little minute since I've done that and I love doing it. So pretty. Traditionally, Sashiko is done on an indigo background with specific Sashiko thread in white. And they're geometric designs a lot of the time. But we're going to take a more modern approach to it and do a symmetrical Sashiko background with an elephant in the center. And I thought that was so perfect because elephants never forget. They have an amazing memory, and I wanted to remember our time together stitching. So this is what I drew out on my iPad in an application called Procreate. And then I did another layer and I drew over it in black on white so that we can get our template. And if this block turns out half as cool as I think it's going to, I think I'm going to actually frame this one. I've got some really cool ribbon trims that I might border this with, and I'll hang it up right here in the trailer. So let's see if we can make this thing amazing. So I'm going to switch it up and use this rust color linen fabric. It's what I have with me, and I think it's going to go good with the fabrics I've chosen. It's got a looser weave than quilter's cotton, and it'll be great to stitch into. So if you can find just like a linen or a loosely woven cotton, this will be great. I'm starting with a 7-inch square, and then I tape the borders with quilter's tape because this stuff loves to fray. Then inside that taped border, I marked a 6.5-inch square with a silver gel pen, keeping in mind that the seam allowance is within this marked square. So if you're going to use this in a quilt or fold it and put it in your journal, just know that if you're following along and doing, starting with a 7-inch square, that outer line that I drew has the seam allowance within it. So just stay within 1/4 of an inch in your designs. So these are the fabrics that I've chosen for the elephant that I thought would go nice with this background color. I got 4 fabrics: his face, trunk, ears, and tusks. There is specific Sashiko thread that you can get, but anything white or bright will do. Here I'm just using a size 8 pearl cotton. Just choose a big contrast thread in the spirit of stitching Sashiko. And I think these ribbons will look great with what I've chosen, so I'm really excited. So go ahead and print 1 copy of the pattern off my website if you're using this pattern, or maybe you have another pattern you're using and have created, which is awesome. But just make sure your design fits in a 6x6-inch square. And then to trace the Sashiko design, we're going to use this tracing chalk paper. I think you can get it over at Joann's or wherever they sell crafts. It's pretty common. We'll go over the design with a ballpoint pen, and then the chalk will transfer onto the fabric. So for my fusible backing this time, I'm going to use Transfer Ease. I like it because it has a one-side sticky background that will adhere to the back of the fabric without using an iron. And then that will keep your applique pieces from fraying. It's great for turned applique too, but here I'm just doing raw applique. It's great because it has a paper side for tracing and a fabric side for printing on an inkjet printer. This has a ton of uses, and I highly recommend this product that you can get from your quilt shop. So on the paper side of your fusible, trace the design with a Sharpie. And here this is a symmetrical design, so there's no reversing or you don't have to worry about any of that. Start with the ears and then outline his face. But whoops, when it comes to his trunk, we can't just chop this piece of applique halfway across his face, or that'll just look odd. So what I decided to do is just draw in lines that go over his eyes to the top of his head. Then those become part of the trunk applique piece, and it'll just look more organic and designy. So then you can go ahead and trace the inside of his face line. And then the trunk can be traced in one piece. And then just to make it easier, I'm just tracing it away from the rest of his face. And then you can do the tusks here too. I didn't quite outline his trunk just right, so I rounded the corner here, and I'll just remember when I cut it out to match the 2 sides and which line to follow. Okay, so set your templates aside for now, and then you're going to cut your pattern to a 6-inch square, and also cut a piece of that chalk paper to a 6-inch square. Follow the gray box. If you're printing from my website, the box itself should measure 6 inches. If not, just check your settings in your print menu, but when I printed it from my website, it printed out at 6, so you should be fine. Okay, so now it's time to trace the Sashiko pattern onto the background. Tape the background onto a solid work surface at all 4 corners. Then center the transfer paper chalk side down onto your fabric, making sure there's a 1/4 inch space between the edges that you drew for your 6.5-inch square. Tape that down on all 4 sides. Painter's tape or quilter's 1/4 inch tape works great here. Then center the design right side up, matching the edges of the transfer paper, and tape that side down at all 4 corners. I use a contrasting pen when tracing the lines so that I know what I've traced, because the last thing you want to do is try to line it up again perfectly if you forgot a few lines. And a gel pen works great. I'm not going to trace these little leaves as I'm not doing these in Sashiko. I'm just thinking lazy daisy with beads, but still in white. So I'll do those last. Just press firmly so you get a good image. Linen's a bit bumpy, so it won't be like tracing onto regular quilter's cotton. Go over every line of Sashiko stitching, but no need to trace the elephant. We'll eye him up later. Okay, the moment of truth. Lifting off the chalk paper to see what we've got. Not bold and perfect, but definitely legible. Save the transfer paper as you can use it over and over again. Since we just used little tiny lines of chalk, there's still a lot of chalk left on there. You'll likely need to go over the lines again with a slim chalk pencil to brighten them up. As long as you can see a faint line, you can draw right over it. When in doubt, just check your pattern to make sure you're getting the shape relatively correct. No need for stressful perfection here, just get close. Trace out the entire design and then hoop it. This hoop is my favorite as the ring is super thin and it just takes a little pinch of the handles to load it in place. And these are available at Joann's as well. As you're stitching the lines, be mindful of your hand placement so you don't rub the chalk completely away. Keep that chalk pencil handy. Sashiko translates in English to little stabs. It's very simple and is basically a running stitch. In traditional Sashiko, there are rules to follow, such as no crossed lines, minimal thread carries on the back, and then keeping the stitching going in one direction as long as you can. Here, we're just going to keep those rules loosely in mind while we work. On a relatively straight or slight curve, we can pick up around 3 to 4 stitches before we pull the yarn through. In Sashiko, the goal is 5 to 7 stitches per inch. I look for 1/8 of an inch on my needle to show, to poke out, and then I bury it back into the fabric and scoop up around 3 threads or so. I push my finger up from underneath and then just push the needle back out through the fabric. I do like my stitches a little bit longer in the front than in the back. I feel like it's just easier for me to stay even if I'm just focusing on the stitches on the front. But just try and stay even. That's really the ultimate goal of Sashiko, or running stitch, or any stitching. When you reach the intense curve though, take your time and just pick up 1 or maybe 2 stitches at a time. This will allow you to change direction and make that direction change look much smoother and easier. In some traditional Sashiko, the fabric is actually gathered onto the needle and isn't hooped. Stitchers would sew fabrics together in this way to make warm garments, and this technique is actually called boro. Finishing the outline of the leaf, I won't have to travel too far to start the next, so I just do a running stitch until I reach another point, and I just sort of like a maze stitch along the whole thing. And then just make sure you go over any faded lines again with your chalk pencil and just keep up on that so that nothing fades completely away. Hooray! I love mindless stitching like that. It is so relaxing. So now that you have the stitching done, let's add our embellishment, the elephant. So you're going to cut all the template pieces directly on the line that you drew. When you get them all cut out, lay them out so that you can see that you have all the pieces. I have to say, it even looks cool in just a white silhouette, doesn't it? Maybe for the next one. But for this one, peel back the paper from your templates and stick the sticky side onto the backs of the fabrics that you're using for each piece. Just watch for direction of fabric line, patterning, motifs, and all of that. With the trunk fabric, I looked for a place on the fabric that might look like it had the wrinkles that an elephant trunk would have. On the polka dot, I'm placing the templates relatively in the same position on the fabric, just matching where I placed the blue dots. And then for the ears, same thing. I'm just placing the two templates on the same place in the fabric and trying to match the direction just so that they coordinate. Your eye will look at that and look like they kind of matched. Even looks like I kind of painted it to look like that. So I love that. And this is actually called fussy cutting for those of you, if you're new to quilting or applique, you might have heard that term, but that's what they mean, just fussy cutting an image out of a fabric. For ease in thinking in which order to place the pieces, cut the shapes out, leaving 1/4 inch space away from the template edge. That way you can just play with the fabrics and think them through a little bit more rather than they're just randomly stuck on this huge piece of fabric. Some pieces will be tucked under so we won't have spaces in between the templates. So if you did the iris with me, I promise this is not nearly as labor intensive. It's just a few pieces. Okay, so starting with the tusk. The only place the tusk will get tucked under is just at the top. So when I cut the shape out, I'll leave 1/8 inch space above the top of the template line and then cut the rest of the shape directly on the fusible line. And that way the fabric won't fray either. The ears, the entire outside, top, bottom, outer edges of the ear can be cut along the template line, but leave 1/8 inch space on the inner line. Away from the inner line of the template so that we can tuck it under the sides of the face. The outer curvy line of the face can be cut directly on the line as that will lay on top of the ear, but the inside of the line of the face will have an extra little 1/8 inch space outside the template line so that it can tuck under the trunk. So if you just think it through one piece at a time, it's pretty self-explanatory. Like, I think you'll get it. When you lay all the pieces out, you'll know if it all is spaced properly and all that. So lift the trunk and the sides of the face off, and then starting with the ears, just look closely to place them evenly spaced along the Sashiko lines. Just keep looking at your pattern here and you'll be able to just eye this up and get really, really close. But I've got a one-sided fusible here, so I'm using fabric glue to hold the left ear in place because I don't want to lift everything up and then have to do the whole thing again. But if I can just hold that glue in place and then just tuck it under, then I'll know where the right ear will go. So then I'll just glue the whole right ear and then pop it onto the other side, just matching up and mirror imaging the left ear. Then you'll glue the sides of the face on, overlapping obviously, and then the trunk will go on, and then the tusks, just eyeing up your pattern the whole time, and then just tuck the tusks under the sides of the face there. But just keep eyeing your pattern up the whole time and just make sure the trunk is centered with the Sashiko lines on the top and the bottom, and you have them placed wherever you want to, just to give enough negative space along his whole face. I think it'll look great. And then just let the glue dry for a little bit while you choose your embroidery yarns or threads to couch the outline. I just used an embroidery floss that's a wool silk. It's really thin. You could do anything here. Just keep your lines really thin. Obviously, this is a small motif, so you don't want to go too thick or you're just going to lose all this work you just did. So with the outlining thread, the silk cotton embroidery floss that I'm using, this is the one I'm going to couch onto. So this is the outline. I'm going to pull it up through the fabric at the starting point and back down through the fabric at the ending point of this single line. This allows me to work without having that extra thread on the front for this short little piece. But I'd pin it on the back just so it stays out of your way because it can easily get caught up in your stitching. With a single strand of sewing thread in a close enough color to the outline, come up through the applique piece 1/16 of an inch away from the edge. Bring the yarn towards the thread and then go back down through the fabric over the yarn, over on the other side of the template, and then directly across from the exit point. So after each stitch, I pull the yarn so that it stays flat and taut against the applique edge, and then it won't pucker. Take another stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the last one and repeat that until you reach the stopping point. So when you come up through the fabric, it's through the applique as well, 1/16 inch away from the edge. pull the yarn in so that you can see the edge of the applique, and then your needle should be touching the applique as you go into the background, but not piercing it. So it's important to start stitching at the place that you come up out of the fabric, as opposed to the place where you went back down at the end, just so that you can keep pulling your yarn on the other side. So for the face outline, you'll repeat the exact same thing. Just come up through the starting point and down through the ending point, and just leave a little loop that you can manipulate and pull as you stitch. Here I'm using green yarn for the outline and a green sewing thread. And then same for the tusk, I'm using white yarn and white sewing thread. And then finally the trunk, where I'm using blue to bring the blue dot color in. But note that I left my yarn on the top of the fabric this time, because when you have a big loop like that, a deep loop, getting it caught is way worse than having that extra yarn on the front to deal with. So you'll just stitch this last as it's on the top of everything else. And this is more relaxing, binge-worthy stitching. I love it. For his eyes, I used teardrop beads in a luminous color of blue and just stitched them on with blue sewing thread 3 or 4 times each, just to lock them in place. And then he's pretty much done. For the extra stitching on the Sashiko, I'm using white yarn in just a bit heavier than the Pearl 8 cotton, just to stitch a few lazy daisies and beads on to match the drawing, which I know I've showed you a million times before. You guys know how to do lazy daisies, pretty easy. This is where it's just a bit more freeing and you can stitch whatever you want, and there's a lot of negative space around the design, so you could have some fun and play with a few ideas. I think my trim is going to take up a lot of that. Plus, this is still a 7-inch square as I'm looking at it, so I need to trim it down. And I think I'm just going to leave it as is, do a few more stitches, share a little slideshow as I complete each little section. Okay, so I think I am going to hang this little guy up. So here's what I did for the border. I cut a piece of felt 8 inches, and then I trimmed up the block to 6.5 inches, and then this little ribbon trim I put on all 4 sides, matching up the outer raw edges, and then I just did a running stitch just to hold it all in place. So the running stitch goes on top of the ribbon and the outer seam allowance of the block. So once that was done, I trimmed the felt down to 1/2 inch outside the outer ribbon part, and then I stitched on the outer border, this really heavy canvas ribbon. But what I did was I cut each piece 1 inch longer than the felt piece so that I could wrap the end over the other end. So I alternated where I put those pieces. So essentially what I did was I'll lay a piece down and I clipped it on the one end, and then I left this 1 inch hanging over. But I started the stitching at, you can see, not on the outside corner but on the inside corner where the inner ribbon starts, so that I could shove the piece of ribbon under the 1 inch extension. So as you can see, I've wrapped, if you look at the top left corner, I wrapped the extended border over the entire piece, and then the piece along the top, I shoved that, the left side of the border under the fold, stitched that all down, and then extended the inch border on the right so that I could shove the right border under the corner, and then that 1 inch would hold that down. And I alternated the sides. So as you can see on the right side border, the border extends past 1 inch. And then with me, I found this cute little pom-pom trim that I thought would be cute. So I just stitched that onto the very bottom and then stitched the bottom border on. And so you can see, if you look at each corner, they are overlapping the next one, and that takes care of all the raw edges. And then to hang it, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet. I might put it on some mat board and then just put a chain on it to hang it. I may just put it flush with the wall, because in the trailer I hang everything with 3M command strip, so I might do something with that. But I love it. I'm so excited to have it hanging here, and just a reminder of our stitching together. Speaking of, we've got a block from Sarah. Her building embroidery stitches are beautiful. That blue and brown is stunning. And our Unity quilt is still growing, and look at all that space for your quilt. So please share your photos. I've been very much enjoying making these blocks. I hope you have too. Next week, I think we're going to do something with hexes or English paper piecing or something like that. So stick around. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.